Okay, welcome back everybody. I hope you've all managed to come back to where we were before. So welcome to the second part of the webinar. We'll be hearing shortly from Samuel Evans, who I'll introduce in a minute. After Sam has presented his ignition presentation, we'll have, I hope, enough time to perhaps elaborate a little bit on some of the projects that Carl Asprey showed in his presentation, and we have a short video to accompany that. And then after that point, we will have the Q&A session. So please do keep your questions coming in so that we can put as many of those to the panelists as we possibly can. And I will try and do a reminder at the end of Sam's presentation to hopefully prompt a few more questions from you. So on that basis then we'll crack on. So I would like to introduce Samuel Evans from the Greater Manchester Combined Authority. Sam is the head of natural environment at the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, and he's leading on the Combined Authority's work to improve the city region's natural environment through developing strategy and policy and delivering key projects and working with a whole range of partners across Greater Manchester. His current work includes the £4 million ignition project, which you will hear about shortly. Before coming to the ignition project, Sam led on the development of the Mayor's 5-year environment plan, which was launched in March 2019. And Sam joined the Greater Manchester Combined Authority in October 2018. And he's on secondment from the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, where he was the head of strategic coordination. Sam has held various roles in the civil service, including working on the Liverpool City Region's devolution agreement and designing and implementing government policy on tackling bovine tuberculosis. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Sam. If you'd like to give your presentation, please, Sam. Thank you.
Thanks, Pete, and great to be here today alongside such great presenters to talk alongside the Ignition project. Just going to sort out my slides, so hopefully you can now see my slides rather than my notes. So yeah, fantastic to be here. I'm going to talk, build a little bit on what Carl talked about in his presentation on what we're doing within Greater Manchester to scale up nature-based solutions for the climate emergency, and what we know we need to do to tackle the increasing risks particularly for surface water flooding and urban heating in Greater Manchester that Carl talked about. So to do that, I'm going to talk through some of the various roles and activities that we carry out as Greater Manchester Combined Authority to this end, to try and upscale the use of nature-based solutions to help us tackle the climate emergency. And there's 4 broad areas I'm going to talk about in terms of our work. So there's setting the direction and strategy and policy. There's how we are working to set investment priorities, so what we want to see investment in our natural environment, nature-based solutions, how we're supporting those projects to become investable, and how we're providing the right local structures to be able to do that. And all of that is aimed at seeing more nature-based solutions in Greater Manchester, including trees, to help us combat those impacts of climate change, and really tackling that big question of how we fund that, how we get investment into our natural environment, given all the benefits we know that brings, but all the challenges we have in our sector around securing funding and the decreasing amount of public funding that we have available to do that. So firstly, in terms of setting direction, strategy and policy, this has been quite an important area for us over the past few years in setting our ambition for what we want Greater Manchester to look like and to be like in the future. Pete mentioned our 5-year environment plan that we published 2 years ago now, that sets our ambition for a thriving natural environment within Greater Manchester. And we've done quite a lot of work over the past few years that the visual on the right tries to explain, of embedding the environment in other strategies and other plans that every city region, every city has, be they economic plans, so how they're going to grow their economy, be they infrastructure plans, so what transport infrastructure they're going to deliver, what regeneration they're going to deliver in their town and city centres, what they're going to do regarding planning, how they are improving lives for their people through health, through skills and those investments, as well as the environment. So rather than seeing the environment and our natural environment as a peripheral issue on its own, really embedding that within our other plans. And that 5-year plan sets out a series of challenges that we need to tackle, from climate change mitigation to tackling issues of air quality that we've already mentioned, to how we consume and produce goods, and to making ourselves resilient and adapted to climate change, as we're here today to talk about. And obviously to protect, maintain and enhance our natural environment. I think it's really important for us that our natural environment underpins and can contribute to all of those other areas as well, to mitigating our climate, mitigating climate change through planting trees and restoring peatland, through again tackling air quality through planting trees, and obviously making our city resilient and adapted to climate change through trees and nature-based solutions. And it's been really important for us to make the case that in tackling those challenges, we will also be able to maximise opportunities for our people, for their health and well-being, creating better places for our citizens, and having the first mover advantage to increase our prosperity and productivity. As far as the natural environment is concerned, and also resilience and adaptation, it's really increasing investment into our natural environment and nature-based solutions that I'm going to focus on today, and is the focus of the Ignition project that I'll talk about. And this really underpins, and it is a challenge, I think, for all of us and across our natural environment priorities, in getting more money, getting more funding, getting more investment into our natural environment to deliver all those benefits that we know about and we know come from those, the multiple benefits that we know we get. To start to have the conversation about investment, we need to know what our natural environment is worth, as well as, you know, beyond the innate value that a number of us place on nature and the natural environment. And in Greater Manchester, we have put quite a lot of effort into developing the evidence base for this, and developing what's called natural capital accounts that aim to measure the benefits provided by our natural assets to businesses, to public services, and to those that call Greater Manchester home. And this can really start to have a conversation with decision makers, with politicians, about the value of our natural environment. And in Greater Manchester, we estimate that we get £1 billion worth of benefits each year from our natural environment. And that's from recreation, from amenity, from physical and mental health, from regulating noise and climate, and providing our food. So we've put a number on the benefits, as you know, beyond the innate benefits that nature we value in nature, put a value on the benefits that we get from our natural environment. And that also provides, over the next 60 years, will provide us with a further £9 billion worth of avoided healthcare costs, preventing hospital admissions, and providing environment for people to take physical activity. So the first step towards seeking funding and investment into our natural environment and nature-based solutions has really been about showing those benefits across the board for trees, for green spaces, for peatland, for all our natural assets in Greater Manchester. In terms of particular resilience challenges, and Carl's already talked about these, we have some 160,000 properties in Greater Manchester alone at risk of surface water flooding. And that's a greater number of properties at risk than from river flooding. And despite this, the level of funding investment given over to reducing that risk of surface water flooding is not really reflected in the scale of the problem. And we face really a key set of challenges to overcome, to making ourselves more resilient and increasing investment. So it's a very complex problem to solve, surface water flooding, and identifying the best locations for investment requires several organisations and stakeholders to come together. There's often uncertainty over the costs and benefits of natural solutions like SUDs and SUDs-enabled street trees. So there's uncertainty over the costs and benefits compared to traditional grey infrastructure and those traditional street scenes we saw in Pierre's presentation before the transformation there in Milan. Our existing public funding mechanisms, certainly in the UK, are ineffective and don't really achieve the scale of change needed. And there's really a lack of necessary policies, guidance, knowledge amongst decision makers and stakeholders to really innovate and see natural solutions upscaled to tackle these resilience challenges. So we're faced with a set of challenges to really tackling that risk, particularly that risk of surface water flooding in Greater Manchester, which is one of the key climate risks that we face. But we do have assets and opportunities that Carl's already mentioned some of these. There's the street trees in Salford. We have quite a range of peatlands in Greater Manchester, both lowland and upland. And there's real opportunities around greening the development that's happening in Greater Manchester. So there are really opportunities to capitalise on and not just challenges. So that's the policy strategic landscape that as a combined authority we've worked with our stakeholders to set and understand the challenges that we're facing, so we're all pulling in the same direction. The next area I want to talk about is how we are setting investment priorities for our natural environment, with a view to trying to broaden the range of investment we get in our natural environment beyond traditional public sector government, local government funding, to trying to bring in other sources and private sources of finance. And in 2019, we published a natural capital investment plan, which sets out our priorities for where and how we want to support a greater range of investment in our natural assets, so that we see those social, environmental and economic benefits for our people and our businesses in Greater Manchester. And we're faced at the moment with natural capital drawing on mainly public sector funding. And really the reason for commissioning that plan was to understand the opportunities, whether there were opportunities to mobilise private capital and other sources of capital to bridge that gap that we see between investors. So we're told there's an unlimited supply of capital out there if the case can be made for investment, and the demand for investment from our projects that we have being developed in Greater Manchester by City of Trees and others, and bridging that gap between investors who want to see a return on investment and natural environment projects and nature-based solutions projects which can deliver benefits, but the return on investment is not always clear. So we have, as I've said, a range of potential sources of capital in the natural environment, ranging from public sector and philanthropic charitable donations over towards the right-hand side of here, where natural environment would be invested in as we invest in other products and other things within society. At the moment, and to get over to that right hand, which is where we want to shift, we need business models that can show that, as well as environmental benefits coming from our natural environment, we can also generate returns on investment and monetize those environmental benefits to provide a return to seek that investment. As that investment won't come in form of grants, but will come in the forms of debt and equity and other types of investment. And we'd be aiming more at mainstream commercial investment rather than governments, trusts, foundations, charitable organisations that we in the sector traditionally rely on for delivering nature-based solutions projects. So our ambition is to shift over to the right-hand side of this diagram, which is a significant challenge, but one that we're working with our partners to try to overcome. And that natural capital investment plan gave us some priority areas to focus on. I'm going to focus on the third one of these around using sustainable drainage systems, so rain gardens, SUDS-enabled street trees, and other natural features that allow us to tackle that surface water risk that we've talked about and we've seen in the example of those trees in Salford and how we scale those up. So that was identified as a potential opportunity for us in our natural capital investment plan, and one that I'll just talk a little bit further about, as this has been the focus of the Ignition project. So in supporting projects becoming investable and being able to attract that investment, that private investment that I talked about, we found through the Ignition project that there are a number of stages to go through in order to be able to do that. There's no quick fix, and it's not a simple thing to do. And generally, and through the Ignition project, we are trying to support and bring a set of projects through these phases. So first of all, we start with the environmental outcomes that we know nature-based solutions can deliver. And we've heard Carl talk about the monitoring of the street trees in Salford and how we know the impact that they have had on slowing the flow of water and also on water quality. So generally, we know the positive impacts that nature-based solutions, that trees and other nature-based solutions can have. So generally, we have proved, and we can technically prove, the positive impacts that they can have. The next step is really identifying and monetizing those benefits. So is somebody willing to pay for a reduction in the flow of water? Is someone willing to pay for improved water quality, or the carbon that's locked up in those trees, or the benefits that come to that street, maybe from property uplift or from business footfall? Can we identify people or groups of people or organisations that are willing to pay for those environmental benefits? And that is a key challenge, because a lot of these benefits, such as health and amenity, are often public goods and are difficult to identify organisations willing and able to pay for those outcomes. Once we've done that, and where we're currently working to on the Ignition project, is to, if we can do that and identify people willing to pay for those, we can show that there's cash flows there, is seeking to raise investment into those nature-based solutions, because we know that somebody is willing to pay for them, and there's a potential value in those and potential to provide a return on that investment, as well as the environmental benefits that they will deliver. And then we can go on towards the right of this diagram, which is seeking funders to start to be able to get us on that journey towards the very end and mainstream investment in nature-based solutions. So we're very much focused, I think, through Ignition on the first three areas of that diagram. Those are the ones I'll talk through in a little bit more detail. So on the technical proving and improving environmental outcomes, I'll just talk through a couple of things that we've done within the project to build on that. So we have built a significant evidence base across nature-based solutions, so green walls, green roofs, street trees, green spaces, and sustainable drainage system. We've got we analysed a database and pulled together a database of over 1,000 evidence items across 12 different types of benefits, from air quality, carbon, water quality, energy use, and summarised and provide headline figures for each of these types of nature-based solutions and the benefits they bring. So really important source of evidence on the environmental outcomes that nature-based solutions can deliver. With our partners on the project, we've pulled that together into a business-facing report, held several roundtables with key partners, and we'll be producing similar reports for local government, for private sector, for suppliers, and for the water industry over the next 12 months. So pulling all of that evidence together into a readable, comprehensive evidence base from which can form the basis of making the case for investment in our natural environment and nature-based solutions, and understanding the environmental benefits that they provide. And that's a free, open resource that anyone can access. A really exciting element of the project is also the installation of a living lab at the University of Salford, which is just now being finished. And this has two main phases to it, which are a phase one, which was completed last October, which included a rain garden, which collects and slows the flow of water and showcases a range of different water management technologies. Phase 2, which has just been completed now, is a green roof on one of their academic buildings, a green wall similarly, and a set of SUDS-enabled street trees. And these form a fully connected living lab. And the really important thing that will be happening with these is the monitoring. So not what you'll be able to see above ground, but what's going on underneath the ground to monitor the impacts that this has on slowing the flow of water, on water quality, but also understanding the benefits that this has for students and others using the campus, what benefits it provides to them for recreation and for just the overall general feel and environment of the campus. And that will be being launched in a few 6 weeks' time. We'll be formally launching the Living Lab, which you're all welcome to attend, and we can send details around on afterwards. The final and really challenging part of the project is using all that evidence to develop a set of projects. So we are looking through Ignition and developing at the moment a set of SUDS projects, so a set of rain gardens and other SUDS at which there's a case for investment, because the water company in the northwest of England wants to manage a particular surface water flood risk there, that the local authority is willing and able to install SUDS on its land. So we're looking through this at schools similarly and other public buildings. So really we're looking at taking and are working to take a pipeline of projects from conception all the way through by this time next year to being ready to invest and deliver them, and securing at least some private investment to be able to do that. We're also developing the next set of projects behind that, so looking at SUDS on a larger scale in particular neighbourhoods where there's a risk of surface and sewer water flooding, models for our parks and green spaces, and those examples in Milan of corporate sponsorship for parks is really interesting to us, because we're looking at exploring that and how we might upscale green roofs as well. But it's really that first set of projects on there that we are focused on delivering. Bit of a complicated slide, but this is just showing really the types of investment we're looking at in those SUDS projects in the top left of your slide. So we're looking at potential impact investors and other public grants and funding that will allow us to deliver a set of SUDS projects for the benefits that they will deliver, particularly to United Utilities, who are our water company, because if we implement SUDS in the right areas, in the right places, of the right type, they will reduce sewer flood risk for United Utilities and the associated costs that they have to pay in dealing with those. So this is the model that we are developing right now within Ignition to try and deliver a sizable set of SUDS projects that aren't reliant on public funding, and are certainly hopefully going to blend public and private funding together. And finally, just to finish up, this supports our wider ambitions within Greater Manchester to put the right local structures in place to be able to bring in more public funding, but also to be able to bring that, as we're hopefully doing through Ignition, alongside private funding sources. And we've recently set up a Greater Manchester Environment Fund, which aims to do just that, and to bring in public funding, but also allow us to bring in increasing amounts of private sector funding and blend those with public funding to deliver more projects and start to build the market for investment in nature-based solutions. So we set this up with one of our local partners, a charity, last year. We've already secured £2 million worth of public funding into the fund to start delivering projects on the ground this year. And we hope over the next couple of years, to be able to grow that and start bringing in more private funding, as we're hopefully doing through Ignition, alongside public funding to deliver more sustainable investment in our natural environment in Greater Manchester, because that's what we know we need to tackle the climate emergency and the impact of climate change here. So thank you very much for listening, and looking forward to hearing some of your questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. That was great. I think the key thing that has come out of that presentation for me is that there is a obvious value to green infrastructure and to sustainable drainage systems. And, you know, quantifying that is really important, because then it will hopefully show there's a case for investment. Investment can be in many different ways, because, you know, Sam mentioned that the water provider in the Northwest is very, very keen to address some of the surface water flooding issues, which has an impact on their assets. So it's a real cost to them. So there's a good business case there. But also, you know, we're looking at engaging with businesses as well to see how investment on the streets where they're located could potentially provide, you know, extra income for them through creating a more attractive place that people want to invest their money in, i.e. going to bars and restaurants and so on. So I think, you know, what Sam has shown is that the Ignition project is really exploring all the different facets where we can make a case for private sector investment. Obviously, it's going to be difficult at the moment with COVID-19, making lots of businesses, I think, protect their money. But we know that we'll get back to a condition where businesses do want to see more green infrastructure. And I think going back to what Piero said earlier on about private sponsorship for green spaces, I wanted to show people was the Leaky Dam constructions that we've been installing on the moorlands above Greater Manchester. So these are measures to try and slow the flow of water entering the main river systems to try and reduce the threat of flooding downstream. So it's really, I think, a demonstration that urban forestry, although it might not be located in an urban area, can actually have an impact downstream. So hopefully now you should be able to see the video, thanks Rick, of how the Leaky Dam was constructed. Okay, everyone, so that didn't quite go to plan, but I hope it showed you what it is that we're trying to do with partners in the uplands around Greater Manchester. And like I said previously, urban forestry, it doesn't have to happen in an urban area to have a benefit in an urban area. And so in Greater Manchester, we have a series of hills, the West Pennines and the South Pennines, where there's lots of opportunities to use some of the existing timber in woodlands up there to create those leaky dams to reduce that risk of flooding downstream. So it's just an example, I think, really of how we can use forestry to provide resilience in an area outside of town to an area much, much further away from where those leaky dams are being produced. So anyway, apologies that didn't quite work out as we wanted it to. So we're now going to proceed with the Q&A session. We've got 15 minutes and we've had a number of questions posted in the Q&A function. So we're going to go through those now and we'll answer those as best we can. And if the panelists can be there available so that when relevant questions for them, if they can help answer that, please. So the first question that we have is from Ian McDermott, and Ian wanted to know about the planting of 3 million trees, what the failure rates might be. Well, that's a good question, Ian. I can probably answer that one on the basis that when we plant trees or new woodlands, that we allow for 20% failure initially, and then we replace those trees over a 3-year period. There's always going to be some failures, whether that's down to the climatic conditions or damage by things like deer, rabbits and sheep as well. So but 20% is roughly what we work on. We've also got a question here for Piero. The question is, Piero, what solutions are you using to map green infrastructure and identify areas for planting? Piero, can you come in on that?
Yeah, and one of the, well, we are using different kind of tools, working the LiDAR flight. So using the LiDAR flight on the, we got LiDAR flight last one, 2016, and we are doing the new one. We have collecting through the, so it's regeneration areas. We have identified map where the people, we need always to balance the demand for new housing, the demand for new services. So we have identified, looking at the areas and availability of the areas, we have mapped also the parameter to identify how much to be green. The other, we have 7 abandoned railway yards in the city. So we identify an abandoned railway yard, the sites of the green. And at the same time, we had a constant dialogue with the different infrastructure management company, so that when they have spot. But now we are working on the new tools on intelligent artificial intelligence tools, and it's also acquiring different kind of sources using a data leak from the different tools. So it's a mix of different information there. But we are simplifying one with an urban intelligence platform. Sorry for this. Because at the time of the COVID is not a good sign.
I'm glad to hear that, Piero. Thank you. The second, we got another question. In fact, quite a few questions for you, Piero. Another question further down is, where could we read more about the school efforts in Milan? This is an area we have already focused on. So can you tell us a bit more about that, please, Piero?
Well, about the school, we are just starting. If you want to look more at this, I will strongly suggest and recommend to look at the experience of Paris, that is more advanced than ours at the moment, because we were copy and paste the Paris experience, because when something is working, is really well done. So you have deep understanding of what is the Milan school ways, look at the Paris experience. The same time Barcelona did, but at the same time also Athens was kicking. So, but the most advanced is Paris. What I can do is sharing some presentation, but at the moment it's a coordination activities with the other department, because working with school is meaning working with 7 up to 8 departments for every school, because there is the educational school, the technical, the educational, the school technical element, there is the let's say, the green department, and we have the green department, and we have the mobility department. So we are kick off the program in organizing the program. We are kick off the first one hopefully this summer. So, but if you want to get the result, and we're understanding it's Paris the best one.
Okay, thank you, Piero. I think I'll ask a question for Sam next. The question to you, Sam, is regarding private investment dynamics. Do these also, I'm just trying to understand this. I guess my question regarding private investment dynamics also apply to Ignition. I think that's putting a quantification on them.
So putting a quantification on benefits, Pete?
I think so. Yeah,
so I could talk a bit about the challenges we've had with that, I think. So I think, as I said, quantifying the environmental benefits, we're all well versed in those and the benefits of nature-based solutions. Quantifying the benefits, for example, to the utility provider of a reduction in risk is not so straightforward. A lot of that is kind of modelled on what impact, and often relatively small. We're talking in urban areas, as we saw with those trees, relatively small number of small size interventions, perhaps across multiple areas. So that brings with it a challenge of understanding the collective impact of a set of smaller interventions, like a set of suds or a set of trees, and being able to translate that into savings in the future for a water company, in terms of reduced incidents, reduced risk, reduced cost to their assets. So that it's really important to try and put figures on those, but that has been and that remains challenging, and it's not always possible to do it for every type of benefit. So, for example, carbon, habitat, biodiversity, we're in the UK getting to a position where those are more valued, but putting figures on and identifying people to pay for health outcomes and other areas is more challenging. So hopefully that's maybe not answered the question completely, but at least those are the challenges we're facing in putting some numbers on those benefits.
Thanks, Sam. A question, Carl, for yourself. In your presentation, you mentioned in this current situation that we're in from a COVID-19 perspective, the importance of parks and open spaces. How is that going to translate in the resilience strategy for Greater Manchester? Is there an emphasis that you're going to put in there about protecting and enhancing those green spaces, and potentially we should be looking to provide more?
Yeah, so I suppose firstly to say we're still, as other places are, still responding to COVID. It's not over. So we're responding to the emergency as it unfolds, which unfortunately it still is unfolding, but also trying to recover at the same time. So we've got this response and recovery happening at the same time. Now, there has been a Living with COVID 12-month resilience plan that was released towards the end of last year. And we've referenced that and made reference to that in our resilience strategy, and that aims to be almost the bridge between recovering from COVID and the refreshed and reviewed Greater Manchester overarching strategy. And within that Living with the COVID plan, it really does talk about kind of how we value green space and how we engage with communities. And one of the big things actually that comes through is the kind of disparities and outcomes that, in relation to COVID. Whether that's based on race, whether that's based on deprivation, it's based on an intersection of lots of different kind of issues, and that's being taken forward through into the Greater Manchester strategy. So real focus on inequalities, and some of those inequalities are about inequalities related to access to green spaces. So I hope, and I think we'll begin to see that issue will be prioritised and taken forward.
It's really good to hear, because you know, certainly living where I do in Stockport, the parks and the green spaces have been absolutely rammed full of people. It's an escape for them, so they're so important that we look after them and improve them wherever we can. A question for you, Sam. The question is, have you linked carbon offsetting or carbon budgeting in the offer to private investors?
So through the SUDS projects, the short answer really is not in terms of financial benefits yet, and that's mainly because with these smaller interventions and the likely, I guess, low number of trees, we don't see that as a huge, you know, if we had a local functioning carbon market, that it could provide a small amount of funding into it, but we don't have that yet. So it's more of we're more linking it as a corporate social responsibility offer to, for companies to play their part in tackling climate change. So not a direct offer in those particular projects. Yeah, I talked a bit at the end about the Greater Manchester Environment Fund, and through that we are looking at the opportunities around our peatland in Greater Manchester. So we've got lowland peatland, which is quite a rare habitat in the UK, and the upland peatland, which you've talked about, Pete, and there are opportunities there for significant carbon sequestration, as there are with woodland creation. So that is also an opportunity that we're looking at developing through the Environment Fund, but I mean, that's probably a couple of years away in terms of the work needed to develop the projects. And also you need, standards that tell you how much carbon is being locked away by doing certain things on the land. So there's again a set of things to come into play before we're in a position to be able to do that. But that's absolutely our ambition, and what we're all working towards is to be able to get that investment in our woodland creation and our peatland restoration, because there is so much potential around that. I think you probably agree with that, Pete, as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks, Sam. Piero, this is a question maybe for you and me. We've had a few questions that said, should we be aiming to plant so many million trees when isn't it better to focus on quality rather than quantity, and looking after them properly? Do you have an answer to that, Piero?
Well, it's a simple one. The metropolitan area of Milan has 3.2 million inhabitants, and we were looking 1 tree for every inhabitant. So that's the simple question. And answering to the question more technical capacity, absolutely yes, we should focus, and we are focusing on quality of planting. I mean, that is a kind of contradiction what we are discussing sometimes, because Europe never had such coverage of forest ever in the history. So we have the larger covering of forest on the European continent, especially in Italy, but all out on the mountain, on the hill, the others. So absolutely we need to planting tree in the street. But the question is also as well, I will repose the question to bring back. I'm absolutely agree that we need more quality on the built environment. Then the question is, should supposed be taking the place of cars? So we as a community, can we capable to leave the cars, start walking, biking, using public transport, and leave the parking slot for trees? Because that is the point in the city. That is the key element. And as well in the built environment, are we also capable to design technology development underground with the quality of trees? Because that is the question we need to pose ourselves as public servant, because my objective, our goal is to plant more trees in the city center of Milan. But are we as a community ready to leave our cars and planting trees? Because that is the challenge. Because if you remember in the 30s and the 40s, before the Second World War, the city were covered with trees. And then comes the car-driven society, And then we had to identify the parking lot, and we removed the cars, and we removed the tree. And now suddenly the future of the city, it was the past. So that is the key point in my opinion. The quality of trees come with the other policy. That is the quality of trees. Otherwise, say we look at the quality, it's just a branding, but if we're not capable to avoid the use of some other mobility issue, we cannot discuss about quality, in my opinion.
Sure. And thank you for that, Pierre. And I think from a Greater Manchester perspective, I would just like to add, we also obviously have our 3 million target, but what's absolutely crucial is that communities are involved in looking after the trees. So we as a community forest, we get communities to plant the trees, and we also run events for the communities to maintain those trees as well. So we're trying to build in sustainability there so that we can reduce the amount of losses. And certainly for things like trees on pavements, highway trees, it's important for us to get as big a budget as possible, and we are paying the contractors that plant the trees to maintain those trees for at least 5 years to get them established before they are then handed over to the local authority, and by that point they should be in a very good condition. But it is a very good question. We need to make sure that what we plant is well looked after and in a very good condition. I'm conscious that we've pretty much run out of time here now, so I think I'm going to wrap this up, and I just wanted to say an enormous thanks to our 3 speakers. I think they've been really excellent. They've presented some really fascinating insights into what is going on in Greater Manchester and Milan. So a big thank you to Carl Asprey, to Piero, and to Sam as well. And I really appreciate your input today. And I'm now going to actually hand back over to Clive just to wrap things up. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. And
Thank you.
may I also add on behalf of EFUF our great thanks to the speakers today. It's been a very interesting session. And as always, we do reveal new insights at events like this. I'm certainly taken quite a few notes of my own, and I hope that this will lead to follow-up. I've also been impressed by the quality of the questions being answered. Being asked. I think some very interesting points have appeared on there as well. Anyway, my duty really is quite short, and it falls into 2 parts. First of all, I perhaps forgot to mention earlier on about the fact that all of the events for EFUF Semester 2021 can be found on a new app that has been developed specifically for this year, although we anticipate it becoming a permanent feature. If you have a mobile phone, if you go to the App Store or to Google Play, you can download the app. It's called My EFUF, MY lowercase EFUF uppercase, and you will find all sorts of events on there. There's quite a lot coming up over the next few weeks during the month of May. Secondly, our conference continues tomorrow. Today's theme was keeping cities cool and reducing flood risk. And tomorrow we move on to a new theme, the air we breathe and the way we feel. The timing is the same, so please join us at 1400 British Summer Time, 1500 Central European Summer Time. And I'm sure we'll have as good and interesting a session as we've had today. So finally, thank you to the organisers, and enjoy the rest of your day.